She hadn't spoken to another soul in 6 years. Stripped of her pack, branded a traitor, and left to freeze in the unforgiving winter of the northern wastes, Clara survived. But her quiet, solitary exile shattered the day the earth trembled under the paws of the brutal Alpha King and his 10 giant wolves. The winter of 1244 was merciless, painting the jagged peaks of the whispering mountains in a thick, suffocating coat of white. In the heart of this frozen wasteland, where the pines grew so thick they choked out the sun, lived Clara. She was an anomaly, a ghost story whispered by the few hunters foolish enough to venture this far north. By all known laws of their kind, she should have been dead. Omegas did not survive without a pack. Their bodies were designed for the warmth of the den for rearing pups, and for the deep, intrinsic bond of a community. Isolation was supposed to drive an Omega mad before the cold could even freeze their blood. Yet as Clara hauled the freshly bled carcass of a snow hare over her shoulder, her breath pluming in the freezing air, she looked nothing like the delicate creatures of the Southern Territories. She was clad in stitched wolf and bear hides, her hands calloused and stained permanently with the sap of healing herbs and dried blood. Across the left side of her neck, stark against her pale skin, was a gruesome, jagged burn scar, the mark of an exile. 6 years ago, she had been a beloved daughter of the Ashborne pack. She had been promised to Tobias, the arrogant, broad-shouldered heir to the Alpha. But when Tobias realized Clara would present as a submissive Omega rather than the powerful beta female he needed to secure his political dominance, he devised a ruthless plot. During the Feast of the Long Night, Clara was dragged before the council, falsely accused of slipping wolfsbane into the chalice of Tobias's father. Tobias himself had delivered the verdict. He had driven the hot iron into her neck, destroying her scent gland, forever muting the sweet lavender and honey aroma that marked her as an Omega. "You are nothing," Tobias had snarled his eyes, flashing yellow in the firelight as she screamed. "Cast her into the wastes. Let the winter take the trash." But the winter had not taken her. Clara had learned to hunt with a rusted iron dagger and traps fashioned from twisted pine roots. She remembered the ancient herbal lore her grandmother, Lady Agatha, had secretly taught her. She survived on sheer, unadulterated spite. On this particular evening, the wind carried a scent that made Clara freeze in her tracks. It was not the musky odor of a mountain bear, nor the sharp tang of a wandering snow leopard. It was the heavy, intoxicating scent of pine ozone and fresh blood. It was the scent of wolves, but not just any wolves. The sheer magnitude of the pheromones flooding the clearing indicated beasts of impossible size and power. The ground began to tremble. Clara dropped the hare, her instincts screaming at her to run to hide in the deep caverns beneath the roots of the ancient oak where she made her home. She scrambled up a steep embankment, pressing her body flat against the icy bark of a massive fir tree, holding her breath. From the dense tree line they emerged. 10 massive dire wolves stepped into the clearing. They were the size of draft horses, their fur thick, matted with snow, and rippling with terrifying muscle. These were not ordinary pack wolves. They were warriors bred for slaughter. Leading them was a beast that made Clara's heart stutter. He was a nightmare, sculpted from midnight jet-black fur, towering a full foot above the rest, his eyes burning like crushed amber in the twilight. This was King Alaric of the Blood Moon Pack, the conqueror of the East, the giant Alpha. Clara had heard the rumors years ago, back when she still sat by a hearth. Alaric was a warlord who had united the fractured northern territories through sheer brutal force. He was said to be ruthless, taking no prisoners and showing no mercy to rogues. What is he doing this far into the wastes? Clara thought, her pulse hammering against her ribs. Suddenly, a sharp metallic snap echoed through the silent forest, followed by a deafening howl of agony. One of the giant grey wolves at the rear of the formation had stepped onto a patch of disturbed snow. Clara's stomach plummeted. It was her iron jaw trap, a heavy, brutal contraption she had salvaged from a dead poacher, designed to snap the leg of a fully grown grizzly. The steel teeth had clamped shut around the wolf's thick foreleg, biting deep into muscle and bone. Instantly, the pack erupted into chaos. The wolves shifted their bones, cracking and reforming in a sickening symphony, until 10 towering naked men stood in the snow. They quickly pulled heavy wool cloaks and leather armor from the packs, strapped to their wolf forms. The injured man collapsed into the snow, gripping his bleeding leg. "Damn it to hell!" he roared. "Hold him down, Gideon!" a voice boomed. It was a voice that seemed to vibrate through the very earth, deep, commanding, and laced with undeniable authority. King Alaric stepped forward, throwing a massive bear pelt over his broad, heavily scarred shoulders. He knelt beside the wounded warrior, inspecting the trap. It's iron, rusted but strong, forged for bears. He looked around the clearing, his amber eyes narrowing. He inhaled deeply, his nostrils flaring. Because her scent gland was scarred, Clara possessed almost no wolf scent. To them she probably smelled like the forest itself, pine needles, dried blood, and dirt. But Alaric was a true alpha king. His senses were preternatural. "We are not alone." Alaric rumbled his gaze, slowly drifting toward the embankment where Clara was hidden. "Whoever set this trap is still here." Clara tightened her grip on her rusted dagger. She had 2 choices: stay hidden and hope they couldn't pry the trap open before the injured wolf bled out, or step forward and face a king known for butchering strangers. Gideon, the king's second-in-command, strained against the iron jaws of the trap, his biceps bulging, but the mechanism was rusted shut. "Sire, I can't pry it. The release lever is jammed. If we force it, we'll sever the artery." Clara closed her eyes. She hated pack wolves. She hated alphas most of all, but she was a healer, and watching a man bleed out from a trap she set felt like a sin against the forest that had kept her alive. With a resigned sigh, she stepped out from behind the fir tree. The moment Clara's boots crunched against the snow, 10 broadswords were drawn from their scabbards. The ring of steel filled the clearing. "Halt!" Gideon shouted, raising his blade despite the blood pooling around his comrade's leg. Clara did not raise her hands. She stood at the top of the embankment, a wild, feral creature wrapped in furs, the rusted dagger held loosely but expertly at her side. She looked down at the towering warriors, her face an unreadable mask of dirt and shadows. "Lower your weapons," King Alaric commanded, his eyes fixed on Clara. He stood up slowly, drawing himself to his full, terrifying height. He was easily 6'7", built like a fortress of muscle and bone. A jagged, faded scar ran from his left temple down to his jawline, a testament to 100 battles won. "A wild woman," Gideon muttered, bewildered. "In the wastes." "She is no ordinary woman," Alaric said, his deep voice carrying over the wind. He took a slow, deliberate step toward the embankment. "You smell like the earth, little bird. But beneath the dirt, I smell wolf, a very faint, broken scent." "Step back from the trap," Clara said. Her voice was raspy, harsh, from years of disuse, scraping like stones grinding together. The men bristled at her tone. No one commanded the Alpha King. Alaric, however, merely raised an eyebrow. "It is your trap." "It was meant for a rogue bear, not careless pups who don't watch the snowdrifts," Clara retorted sharply. A collective gasp went through the guards. Gideon looked ready to charge up the hill and decapitate her, but Alaric held up a single massive hand. To the king's absolute shock, a low rumble of amusement vibrated in his chest. "Careless pups," Alaric repeated, a dark smirk playing on his lips. You have a sharp tongue for someone outnumbered 10 to 1. My man is bleeding. You know how to open this contraption." "I built it. I can open it," Clara said. She slowly descended the snowy bank, her eyes darting between the armed men. "But if any of you move toward me, I will leave the mechanism locked, and you can chop off his leg to free him." Alaric stepped aside, giving her a clear path. The sheer proximity to the Alpha King was suffocating. His aura was heavy, demanding submission, pressing against Clara's instincts. Her inner wolf, dormant and broken for 6 years, whined softly, urging her to bare her throat to the superior predator. Clara gritted her teeth ruthlessly, crushing the instinct. She belonged to no one. She knelt beside the injured guard. Up close, the damage was severe, but the artery was intact. Clara reached into her fur coat, pulling out a small leather pouch. She sprinkled a handful of crushed yarrow and dried spider webs over the wound to staunch the bleeding. Then she pulled a small custom-made iron pin from her belt, inserting it into a hidden hole in the trap's mechanism. With a sharp twist and a heavy heave of her weight, the iron jaws sprang open. The guard groaned in relief, pulling his leg free. Clara immediately stepped back, creating distance between herself and the men. "You have a healer's touch," Alaric observed, his amber eyes tracking her every movement. "And yet you carry no pack scent. You bear the brand of an exile." His gaze locked onto the scarred flesh of her neck, exposed briefly as the wind blew her furs aside. His expression darkened instantly. The playful amusement vanished, replaced by a cold, terrifying fury. "Who burned you?" Clara pulled her fur collar up tight. "That is none of your concern, Alpha. Your man is free. Leave my territory." "Your territory?" Gideon scoffed, wrapping a bandage tightly around the guard's leg. "This is the King's land. The Blood Moon Pack claims all the northern reaches." "Then you can claim the snow and the dead trees," Clara spat, turning her back to them to retreat up the hill. "I want no part of your politics." "Wait," Alaric commanded. It wasn't a request. It was an alpha command laced with power. Clara stumbled, her knees buckling slightly as the compulsion hit her nervous system, but she fought it, catching herself on a tree trunk. She looked over her shoulder, glaring at him with a fiery defiance that made Alaric's breath hitch. She resisted me, Alaric thought, utterly stunned. A broken exiled Omega just resisted an Alpha King's direct command. "We are not here to hunt you," Alaric said, his tone softening a fraction, though still echoing with authority. "We are marching south, to the Ashborne pack." Clara's heart stopped. The blood drained from her face, leaving her paler than the snow. "Ashborne." She whispered the name, tasting like ash on her tongue. "They have been raiding my southern borders," Alaric explained, his eyes never leaving her face, analyzing her reaction. "Their alpha is old and weak, and his son Tobias has grown overly ambitious. They slaughter my livestock and steal my timber, hiding behind the treacherous passes of these mountains. I am going to tear their gates down and take their heads." Clara stared at the king. The man who had ruined her life, who had burned her flesh and left her to die, was now in the crosshairs of the most dangerous predator in the realm. "The mountain passes are completely snowed in," Clara said, her voice hollow. "The whispering canyons are full of false trails and sheer drops. You will lose half your men before you even see the smoke of Ashbourne's chimneys." Alaric stepped closer, closing the distance between them until he was mere inches from her. He smelled of rain iron and a dangerous protective warmth. He looked down at her, taking in her wild hair, her dirt-smudged face, and the fierce, unbroken spirit burning in her eyes. "Which is exactly why—" Alaric murmured, his voice a deep, vibrating purr. "You are going to guide us." "No," Clara said, immediately stepping back. I swore I would never return to that place. I would rather freeze in the wastes than look at Tobias's face again. If you guide us, Alaric countered, leaning in, you will not just look at his face. You will watch me strip him of his title, his pack, and his life. You will watch him burn just as he burned you. Clara looked at the massive king. The offer was a dark, venomous temptation. Vengeance. Something she had buried deep beneath the snow and survival. She looked at the 10 heavily armed giant men waiting for their king's order. They were a force of pure destruction. "And if I refuse?" she asked quietly. Alaric's eyes darkened, filled with a sudden, inexplicable possessiveness that he himself didn't fully understand. "I am a king, little bird. I do not ask twice. You will come with us, whether as our honored guide or over my shoulder as my captive." Clara gripped her dagger, weighing her options. There was no escaping them. Not now. The peaceful, solitary life she had built was over. The past she had run from had finally caught up to her, riding on the backs of 10 giant wolves. "Fine," Clara whispered, her eyes flashing with a cold, hard light. "I will take you to Ashborne, but when we get there, Tobias is mine." The journey through the whispering canyons was a brutal test of endurance that weeded out the weak and devoured the careless. For 3 days, the winds howled like tortured spirits, whipping ice crystals into their faces like shards of glass. True to his word, Alaric had commanded his men to shift. 10 monstrous wolves now navigated the treacherous, narrow ledge of the mountain pass. Clara marched on foot, her fur-wrapped boots, finding the hidden solid footholds beneath the deceptive powder. She refused to ride on the backs of the dire wolves, despite Gideon's gruff insistence. She trusted her own 2 feet more than the beasts she had grown to despise. But on the 4th night, the mountain finally demanded its toll. They were crossing a natural bridge of ancient compacted ice over a gorge so deep the bottom was lost in shadows. Clara was leading, tapping the ice with a heavy oak staff. Behind her walked Alaric in his human form, stubbornly refusing to shift so he could keep a closer eye on their guide. Without warning, a thunderous crack echoed through the canyon. The ice beneath Clara's boots gave way. She didn't even have time to scream. The ground simply vanished, plunging her toward the black abyss. But before gravity could claim her, a massive hand clamped around her wrist with the force of a steel vice. Clara slammed against the jagged edge of the cliff face, the breath knocked from her lungs. She looked up, dangling over a 1,000-foot drop. Alaric was lying flat on the fracturing ice, his massive shoulders straining as he held her entire body weight with a single arm. His amber eyes blazed with a terrifying primal panic. "I have you!" Alaric roared over the wind, his biceps bulging as the ice groaned beneath him. "Do not move." With a sheer display of monstrous strength, he hauled her upward, dragging her over the ledge and pulling her flush against his broad chest. They rolled away from the collapsing bridge, crashing into the deep snow on solid ground. Clara lay beneath him, her chest heaving, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Alaric's heavy muscular frame caged her in shielding her from the biting wind. He was breathing just as hard, his face inches from hers. Up close, the gold in his irises was mesmerizing, swirling with an emotion so intense it made Clara's breath hitch. For a fraction of a second, the cold vanished. A shocking electric heat flared from the point where his chest pressed against hers, seeping through layers of thick fur and leather straight to her bones. Clara's dormant inner wolf, the creature she thought dead and buried beneath years of trauma, let out a soft, yearning whimper. "Mate." The word echoed in her mind, a terrifying revelation. Alaric froze his pupils, blowing wide, until his eyes were almost entirely black. He felt it too. The soul-deep tether that bound two wolves together. It bypassed her ruined scent gland, entirely connecting them on a primal spiritual plane that no hot iron could burn away. "You," Alaric whispered, his voice a hoarse, ragged rumble. He raised a gloved hand, his thumb gently brushing a snowflake from her cheek. "All these years I thought the moon goddess had cursed me to rule alone. But she was just hiding you in the ice." Panic seized Clara. She shoved hard against his chest, scrambling backward in the snow like a cornered animal. "No!" she gasped, her voice trembling. "No, the cold is playing tricks on you, Alpha. I am broken. I am nothing." "Do not insult my instincts, Clara." Alaric growled, softly sitting up. The possessiveness in his gaze was now absolute, locking onto her like a predator that had finally found its prize. "You are no broken thing. You are a survivor. And you are mine." "I belong to no one," she spat, though her hands shook as she grabbed her fallen staff. "We made a deal, Alaric. I guide you to Ashborne. I get Tobias. That is all." Alaric watched her, the fierce defiance in her eyes, only stoking the fire in his blood. He slowly stood, towering over her. "We will finish our deal, little bird. But do not mistake my patience for surrender. Once the blood is washed from the snow at Ashborne, I am claiming my queen." The rest of the journey was suffocating in its tension. The giant wolves of the Blood Moon Pack seemed to sense the shift in their king. They treated Clara no longer as a strange guide, but with a deferential, almost reverent caution. Even Bartholomew the guard, whose leg she had saved, offered her the choicest cuts of roasted elk when they camped. On the dawn of the 7th day, the blizzard finally broke, revealing the sprawling, fortified valley of the Ashborne Pack. From their vantage point on the ridge, Clara looked down at the massive wooden palisades, the stone watchtowers, and the sprawling village nestled around the Alpha's grand timber lodge. Smoke curled lazily from the chimneys. It looked peaceful. It looked like home, and she hated it with every fibre of her being. "Alpha Reginald's defences are weak," Gideon noted, standing beside Alaric, a heavy battle-axe resting on his shoulder. "They rely on the mountains to keep enemies out. They have no guards on the northern perimeter. Because no one crosses the wastes in winter," Clara said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Tobias made sure of that when he threw me out to die." Alaric stepped beside her, his presence a heavy, comforting heat in the freezing dawn. He didn't touch her, but his proximity was a shield. "How do you want this done?" he asked, deferring to her. It was a shocking gesture of respect from an Alpha King to an exiled Omega. Clara's eyes hardened, fixing on the grand timber lodge in the center of the village. "We don't sneak in. We don't hide. We walk through the front gate, and we let them know exactly who came for them." Alaric's lips curled into a terrifying, bloodthirsty smile. "As you wish." The sun was high when the heavy oak gates of Ashborne exploded inward in a shower of splintered wood and twisted iron. Two of Alaric's giant dire wolves had slammed into the barricade like living battering rams. The sound was deafening, echoing through the peaceful valley like a thunderclap. Villagers screamed, dropping their baskets of firewood and fleeing into the snow as 10 monstrous beasts stalked into the courtyard. Alarm bells rang from the watchtowers. Within moments, dozens of Ashborne warriors poured from the barracks, shifting into their wolf forms. But as they charged, they skidded to a halt, their snarls dying in their throats. They were large wolves, but against the Blood Moon Pack they looked like pups. Alaric's men did not even bother to shift into their human forms to draw weapons. They merely bared teeth the size of daggers, their deep, rumbling growls shaking the very earth. The sheer, suffocating pressure of Alaric's alpha aura washed over the courtyard, pressing the defending wolves to their bellies in forced submission. From the center of the giant pack, Alaric stepped forward in his human form, draped in his black furs, his hand resting on the pommel of his broadsword. Beside him walked Clara. She had shed her heavy outer coat, wearing only her fitted leather tunic and trousers. She held her rusted iron dagger, her scarred neck fully exposed to the crisp winter air. The heavy doors of the Alpha's lodge swung open. Alpha Reginald, an aging, silver-haired man, stepped out onto the porch flanked by his son Tobias. Tobias had grown broader, his face harder, but the arrogant, cruel sneer was exactly the same. He looked at the invading force, his eyes widening in terror at the sight of the Blood Moon King. But then his gaze shifted to the woman standing at Alaric's side. The color drained from Tobias's face. "Clara." He choked out, staring as if he were looking at a ghost. "Impossible. You're dead." "Not dead enough, Tobias," Clara said, her voice projecting clearly across the silent, terrified courtyard. "King Alaric." Alpha Reginald stammered, trying to mask his fear with diplomacy. "What is the meaning of this unprovoked attack? We have no quarrel with the Blood Moon Pack. You raid my borders, slaughter my herds, and steal my timber." Alaric boomed, his voice echoing off the valley walls. "And you ask what quarrel I have? You are a thief, Reginald, but I am not here for your petty crimes." Alaric gestured to Clara. "I am here to collect a debt owed to my mate." A collective gasp swept through the Ashborne villagers. Tobias looked physically ill. "Mate, the king's mate. She is an Omega, a broken, exiled traitor." "She was framed," an older woman's voice cried out from the crowd. Clara turned. It was Lady Beatrice, the pack's historian, and Clara's old mentor. The woman stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. She was framed by Tobias. "I found the empty vials of wolfsbane beneath his floorboards the week after she was banished. When I brought it to Alpha Reginald, he threatened to kill my family if I ever spoke of it." The courtyard erupted into furious murmurs. The Ashborne wolves began to look at their Alpha and his son with dawning disgust. "Silence!" Tobias roared, stepping off the porch. He began to shift his bones, cracking fur ripping through his skin until a large brown wolf stood in the snow, snarling viciously at Clara. "I won't let you ruin me." Tobias's voice echoed through the mind link, a desperate, pathetic whine. He lunged at her jaws, snapping for her throat. Alaric stepped forward to intercept his sword, drawn in a blur of steel, but Clara threw her arm out. "No!" she shouted. "He is mine!" Alaric froze, his jaw clenching, but he stepped back, honoring her right to vengeance. Clara did not shift. She couldn't. The trauma of her banishment had severed her connection to her wolf form. But she didn't need claws to kill a monster. As the massive brown wolf lunged, Clara dropped to her knees, sliding under his snapping jaws on the slick ice. Using his own momentum against him, she drove the rusted iron dagger upward, burying it hilt deep into the soft, unarmored flesh beneath Tobias's ribcage. Tobias let out a high-pitched yelp of agony, crashing into the snow. He thrashed wildly, shifting back into his human form, clutching his bleeding side. He looked up at Clara, coughing blood, his eyes wide with shock. "You!" Tobias gasped. "You were supposed to die. If you had just died, the bloodline would have been mine. No one would have known your mother, Rowena, was the true Alpha." The courtyard went deathly silent. Clara froze, staring down at the dying man. Rowena. Her mother, who had died mysteriously when Clara was a child. The pack had always been told Reginald took over because there were no heirs. "You usurped her mother's throne." Alaric realized aloud, his voice dripping with lethal disgust as he looked at Reginald. You exiled the true heir to keep your stolen crown. Reginald backed away, his hands raised in surrender, but Alaric was faster. In one terrifyingly fluid motion, the king crossed the distance and swung his broadsword. Reginald's head separated from his shoulders, tumbling into the red-stained snow. Tobias let out a final gurgling breath and went still. It was over. The tyrannical reign of Ashborne was broken. Clara stood amidst the carnage, her chest heaving, the bloodied dagger slipping from her numb fingers. 6 years of cold, of starvation, of burning hatred, it all rushed out of her at once. Her knees buckled. Before she could hit the ground, massive arms caught her. Alaric pulled her flush against his chest, tucking her face into the crook of his neck. He didn't care about the blood or the dirt. He held her like she was the most precious thing in the world. "It's over, my queen," Alaric whispered into her hair, his alpha aura wrapping around her in a cocoon of absolute safety and warmth. "You are home, and you will never be cold again." Slowly, one by one, the wolves of Ashborne bowed their heads, exposing their throats in absolute submission. Not to the giant king who had breached their walls, but to the wild, unbroken Omega who had survived the wastes to reclaim her birthright. Did Clara's brutal revenge and her unexpected romance with the giant Alpha King leave you breathless? If you loved this tale of betrayal, survival, and a love that defies all odds, don't let the story end here. Hit that like button, share this video with your fellow fantasy romance fans, and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling werewolf dramas. Drop a comment below on what you want next.